Hi there, this is 418 Astrology, and today we're going to look at a viewer's birth chart. David, who was born in Northern Ireland, asked us to look at his chart, and so I thought I'd give some commentary on it. So let's see, this is his chart right here, and anybody who's been watching my videos knows that this is the place where I always start. This right here, this is between where 9 and 8 would be on a regular clock, like the kind of clock that you'd hang in your kitchen. And this is where the first house always is. The first house, the planets in it, the ascendant, which is this point right here, these are the most important parts of a chart. And so if you're just doing a quick and dirty read on somebody, this is where you want to start. If you're doing a long, involved read on somebody, this is where you want to start because it's the most important. Everything else kind of tapers down in significance after that. The meaning of the first house, the planets in the first house, is primary. So let's see what David's got going on for his first house. So as we can see, the sign that was rising when he was born is Leo. This is the Leo symbol right here. It's supposed to look like a lion with a mane. And I guess if you use some imagination, it can. Excuse me. So David is Leo rising. So that means his ruler is the sun. But we won't go to the sun just yet because first we want to start with the planets that are in the first house. There's nothing, the ascendant is right here at 15 degrees of Leo. There's nothing right on the ascendant, which is, if you have a planet right on your ascendant, it really colors the whole birth chart with that planet. David doesn't have that. He has Mars right here, a little bit away from the ascendant, but still in the first house. And so this gives everything in David's chart a Martian flavor, for lack of a better term. This means that he is really connected to the force of separation, which is what Mars is at the end of the day. Whether it's, pulling away from the crowd in a race, cutting somebody's arm off, going into seclusion, Mars is all about separation, separation, separation. And so that's one of the primary forces that's at work in David's life, or anybody who has Mars in the first house. So, and we have to remember as we go through the chart and look at everything else, that Mars is always going to be there. And that Mars should always kind of be in the back of our minds when we're thinking about David, you think Mars, because having a planet like this so close to the ascendant is so important. So that's step one. We think David, we think Mars, and he's going to go at things in a Martian way, for lack of a better term. So, well, keeping that in mind, what's the most important thing in a chart? It's the first house planets, but really it's the ruler of the chart. And so these planets all come in together as being important. So here's the ruler of his chart. It's in another fire sign of Sagittarius. This right here is the symbol for Sagittarius. It's supposed to look like a bow being drawn by a hunter. So his sun is in Sagittarius in the 5th house. Let's back up a little bit. You know how I said there is a Martian flavor to everything that David does? And so this would give him Martian qualities, which are associated with, being a go-getter, being somebody that wants to distinguish themselves or compete. And with Leo rising, that makes the sun the ruler of the chart. And that makes the sun David's ruler. We know that. But when the sun is your ruler, you're really here to become what your sun says you're supposed to be. That's really your mission in life, is becoming that. And that it depends on the planet that rules you, what's the most important or interesting. But what David is here to do is to become this 5th house sun. And he'll do that like he does everything or most things anyway, in a Martian way. So becoming this 5th house Sagittarius energy, how can we extract more meaning out of that? So 5th house is somewhat about the self. It's about the self and its creativity and its enjoyment in that creativity. Whereas across the way, because remember the houses always mean the opposite of the house across from each other. So the any birth chart is really like 6 yin yangs all arranged across from each other. This is them. Uh, here's one yin yang. It's the 5th house versus the 11th house. And so 5th house means like the things that bring you pleasure, the things that come out of you, so to speak. Whereas 11th house is gifts, good fortune that comes from other people. And so it's a real self versus other kind of dichotomy. And David is here to do his own stuff, which because he's in the 5th house, not the 11th. His son is in the 5th house, not the 11th. And that's an important distinction. And that's something to keep in mind. So this is someone who is competitively driven, probably, wants to distinguish themselves. And this is probably something that people see about him right away. Going back to the ascendant for a second, sometimes I talk about the ascendant being, it's your viewpoint, but you have to turn that around too, because everything in astrology is double-sided. So it's also your eyes, it's also your face. And so when David walks into a room, people see this Martian quality. Going back to the sun. So he is here to become something creative because it's 5th house. He is here to create, and he is here to create in a Sagittarian way, because Sagittarius is the house that we're talking about here. So how do you create in a Sagittarian way? Sagittarius is I call it an ending sign, but most astrologers would call it a mutable sign. It's the end of fire. Here Leo is another fire sign. That's the middle of fire. Aries is the beginning of fire. The beginning of fire would be like the gas igniting on your stove, a bomb going off, a spark. The middle of fire would be more like a bonfire or the sun. When you get to Sagittarius, that fire's burning out. We're coming to 4th of July here in the United States. So, we'll have fireworks that we'll see soon. And those are very Sagittarian. It's gorgeous. They're up in the air, spreading out, which is very Jupiterian, Sagittarius, that fire spreading out in the air. So you could even say, looking at this chart, you could say that David's here to create his own creative fireworks. And that is what he is here to do. The ruler of the ascendant really tells us our life purpose. And he's here to make creative fireworks. Fireworks is just the word that I'm using, but it's analogous to whatever it is that he's here to create. And so if you're doing your life purpose, you will die happy and fulfilled. If you're not doing your life purpose, then it's possible to feel like your life isn't fulfilled, like you're going without a rudder. So David is here in kind of in a Martian way, in a competitive way. He's here to create his own fireworks. So these are the big headlines of David's chart. We've done the planets in the 1st house, which is where I always start, and talking about the ascendant. Then we've gone to the ruler of the 1st house. So what do we do next? So next we would do what are called the lights. And this is the old-fashioned term for the sun and the moon, because these are the big planets that, from our perspective, and remember, astrology is all about what you see, what you perceive through your eyes. That's the ascendant. And so the moon, by this, is as important as the sun in a way, because it's as big as the sun. It's up there for about as much time as the sun is in the sky. It's everything is how you perceive it from your point of view in astrology. So we always keep coming back to that. So the next important thing in anybody's chart, we start with the ruler of the ascendant, but then we go to the sun or the moon, depending on if it's a day or a night chart. With David's ruler, ascendant ruler, we've already covered that. And that's the sun. So the sun's already covered. So the moon would be the next thing. Here's the moon up here. He's got the moon very close, almost conjoining midheaven. And so this is like, if you were structuring this in an essay for school, your whole first paragraph would be that first house, the planets in it, the ascendant. The second paragraph would be the first house ruler, the sun, what that's talking about. Now we're third paragraph. And so it's a little bit, what we're talking about now diminishes in importance from what we've already seen, and perhaps adds new color or new detail. So what is the moon telling us? Well, one thing that strikes me right away is David's chart, all the headlines of it, straight from the beginning. David's chart involves all three fire signs very actively. He's got Leo rising, his chart ruler and his sun are in Sagittarius. And now we look at the moon and it brings us to Aries. So this is fire, fire, fire. What does that mean practically to have so much fire in your chart in so much important places? Well, like I said, we're bringing through the things that we learned previously in his chart. So we're remembering that he is competitive in some way. He's here to create his own fireworks. And those are both fiery things that we want to keep carrying through in the reading because they are so important. Okay, back to David's chart. I paused there for a moment. And my Zoom is not cooperating with me. Hold on one moment. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. I had a little technical difficulty there. So we were talking about David's moon, which is up here, and notably again, is in a fire sign. So everything David has been all fire. And what I was starting to talk about is the meaning of fire. So what does it mean to be such a fire sign person? Fire sign people are active. When sometimes actually looking at uh, literature or stories can tell us a lot about these things because astrology is really baked into our culture. Astrology is the oldest technology. So if you think about fire signs, you can think about Gryffindor from Harry Potter. That was a fire associated house. Those characters they took action. They were the ones that would take action. They were the brave ones. And so when you think fire, you think action. So fire people are doers. They're here to hit the ground running, so to speak. And you add Mars into that. And remember, Mars is on top of everything in David's chart. And it makes someone who's even more driven. So going back up to the moon represents our feelings and where we feel most comfortable. And David's moon is right up here, right close to midheaven. This little circle that's cut in half is it's the representation, it's the symbol for midheaven. So this is the highest point in the sky, and his moon is right here next to that. And what this means, wherever the moon is wherever we feel most comfortable. It talks about getting our emotional needs met. And in a certain way, David's moon is even more important than you might think. It's third in the line of what we're looking at, but it's still hugely important because it's what's called the sect ruler of the chart. Because day charts are ruled by the moon, day charts are ruled by the sun, excuse me, and night charts are ruled by the moon. So going to a night charts like David's, even though we've talked about the sun already, the sun has set in this chart because it's below the horizon line. And it's the moon that's up in the sky being active, being activated, right up there where everyone can see it in midheaven. And remember what I said earlier about astrology being all about our point of view, how things look from where we stand. That's the only thing that's unique about us. I'm the only person sitting in this exact room, on this exact street, in this exact town, at this exact place with this viewpoint. And you're the only person with your viewpoint. So from David's viewpoint, what is this moon telling us? It's something that's very important in the chart, because if you had been there on David's birth, you'd look up in the sky and the moon would be at its highest point in the sky. So what is this moon telling us? It's telling us about his emotional needs. The sun tells us what he's here to become, because the sun is all about becoming. The moon is about feeling. And you can see how moons and suns can be at cross purposes in people's charts, where, I don't know, maybe someone is here to become, sun-wise, a big extrovert, but their needs are all interior. And so there can be a contrast sometimes between where our feelings are and what we're here to become. And that can be a challenge for people, or not. For David, it would not be a challenge, because his sun and his moon are in harmony, because they're both in these fire signs. And signs of the same element work very well together. And you can see, just outlining them here, they make the fire signs and all the signs of any one element make an aspect to each other that's called trine. And it's considered very harmonious. And so everything in all of these signs, all of these houses for David, the first house, the fifth house, the ninth house, these all work well together, which is great news. It suggests an easier life, or an easier time of things. Things may come easily to people who have a lot of trines happening in this chart. And again, we could stop now. I have a few more minutes, but we could stop now and we'd be done with David's chart, in the sense that we've sketched in the picture. We've talked about the most important things. And these are the headlines, as you say. So he's got all of these, the sun, the moon, the Mars, all working together, which is a good thing. And that's denoted too in the chart by these blue triangles in the middle. I would say these blue triangles are those trines all linking together. And it's a good thing. These parts all work harmoniously together. So let's look a little bit more at what these feelings mean. So what are these feelings that are so important to David? And doing somebody's birth chart, you want to give them an insight like this that they can understand, that makes sense to them. And that's what the houses do. The meanings of the houses really connect us to our lives. So ninth house, he's got the moon in the ninth house in Aries, and right close to midheaven. So this is someone who would be most comfortable in the spotlight, most comfortable in the public square, most comfortable right in the middle of downtown where everyone can see him, most comfortable at the pinnacle of his career, most comfortable in public. And that's what the meanings of midheaven are. The ninth house has to do with things that are far away, broader horizons. And so the part of the public square that is about business, we'll do a little dollar sign, more about business and more about money and traditional ideas of career, would be 10th house. Ninth house is a little bit more like, let's go on an adventure, let's go to the moon, where it's high ideals, striving for high ideals, trying to be excellent in your chosen field and kind of conform to those high ideals. And so he is most comfortable doing that, most comfortable mountain climbing, most comfortable visiting a new place, most comfortable going to a college, most comfortable learning something new or having his mind blown by a spiritual teacher. That's where he's most comfortable, doing all that in public. So does everything I've said tell us much about who David actually is? I don't know. In terms of his outer life, does this mean that he's, this is someone who could easily be an artist or an extreme sports person or a YouTube person because of that ninth house moon conjunct midheaven? But our astrology doesn't really tell us how these symbols are going to manifest in our lives. We get to choose how the symbols manifest in our lives. And so this is how David's world looks from David's viewpoint, but we can't guarantee that he's embodied any of this any more than anybody else has, but just that this is his inner world, and this is what the world feels like to him through his point of view. So we could stop the reading right there, but just to demonstrate a more full reading, we'll go into what the next steps would be. So we started, as you know, I've gone over it a couple times now. First house planets, the ascendant ruler, the sun. Then we went, since we'd already done the sun, we went next to the moon, and we noted that this is a moon ruled night chart. So we talked about those three components. So once you've talked about the ascendant leader, the sun, and the moon, what are the next most important things in a chart? Jupiter or Saturn? And it kind of depends on what kind of reader do you want to make. Do you want to start with the good news or the bad news? Because Jupiter is going to represent for anybody the best place in their chart. And Saturn's going to represent for anybody the worst place in the chart. That's because Jupiter is the greater benefic and Saturn is the greater malefic. And so basically, these are the really good things and the really bad things. So we'll start with the good things. And this is probably a good way to do it. If you're giving somebody a reading, say, and you only have an hour, and you've talked about these 3 points that we've already talked about. Where would we go next? I would say Jupiter, because Jupiter is the positive one. So Jupiter looks like this red curly number 4. And it's here in the 8th house. Now, Jupiter is where we expand and where life expands easily for us. And it denotes the easiest part of life, or the part with the greatest blessing. So for David, that's 8th house. And Jupiter is in Pisces. So 8th house is vulnerability. This is not a great house for any planet, although most of us have 8th house planets, and we have to deal with whatever's in the 8th house, but it represents our vulnerability. Across the way in the 2nd house represents what makes us secure. And then 8th house is the opposite, what makes us insecure. But what makes us insecure can actually be very rich territory, as someone like David would undoubtedly be able to tell you, because this is where all the psychological growth happens. This is where all the emotional learning happens. This is where a lot of our real expansion happens. And it's very kind of fortuitous in a way to have your expansion happen in your vulnerabilities. So this is someone who would be the best things for him, the best parts of life, the easiest, sweetest parts of life for him would be in this vulnerability area. So it's probably has a lot to do with his relationships, especially because Jupiter here is so close to his 7th house. But more importantly, let's talk about what Jupiter does and what Jupiter's doing. So there's these feelings of vulnerability in the 8th house, but those are positive for David, or more positive, because this is Pisces we're talking about. And Pisces is feelings / water. Water equals feelings. Pisces is the ending sign of feelings. And so in Cancer, you've got a fire hose of feelings blasting at you. More almost than you can handle, but it's new stuff all the time. Like, whoa. And Scorpio is the middle of water. It's water totally flat or frozen or still. And then Pisces is water starting to turn into something else, maybe mud, maybe a cloud, but these are our most refined feelings. And so this is another side of David's personality, certainly, because everything that we've seen up until now has been fire, 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 action, 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 passion, passion, passion. But then we look at his greatest blessing, and it's these deep, expansive feelings. We've got Jupiter here. Jupiter rules Pisces. And so this is his first planet that's in its rulership. And so it may be the strongest planet in this chart, although he's also got Saturn in rulership if we get to him. So he's got Jupiter in rulership here. So this is maybe one of his strongest planets. Jupiter is also conjoins Chiron, which is this little planet that looks like a key. And it's a minor planet, but astrologers use it a lot. You know how I always say Jupiter is expanding, expanding, expanding. Chiron is always healing, healing, healing. He's known as the wounded healer. And if you're going to be healing, 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 you have to be wounded because there's always something to heal. There's always more wounds. It's healing, 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 healing. But Chiron showing up in the 8th house, conjunct Jupiter in Pisces, this is someone who this is rich territory for David, rich feelings territory with a real healing bent because of the presence of Chiron with that Jupiter. And so this is someone who, even with all the fiery stuff, he could be an emotional healer. He has a very big emotional healing side to him. And some of that, because this comes part and parcel with Chiron, is he's walked his own difficult path with this too. Because Chiron is the wounded healer who heals others. And so David is someone who will have sharply felt his vulnerabilities as we sharply feel all our wounds with Chiron, but he has also, in his lifetime, will, or already has, see his greatest blessings come from those vulnerabilities. Okay, so we've talked a lot about David's 8th house Jupiter and the blessings that can bring. They are very much activated by these. Jupiter and Chiron oppose Uranus almost perfectly. And Pluto's kind of in the mix here too. He's close enough to be involved. You could go down a whole different path talking about what this Pluto and Uranus mean in the opposition, but it's kind of would just be more detail on Jupiter and more detail on how Jupiter functions. And I would say Jupiter is constantly challenged. His vulnerabilities, one way to translate what I'm seeing is his vulnerabilities, which are experienced as pleasant opportunities for emotional growth for him, are challenged continually by unexpected, and Uranus governs the unexpected, by unexpected circumstances probably in his money, in the things that make him feel secure, which for most people is money, possessions, valuables. And so things that are unexpected for David happen there. And that challenges that part of him that likes to swim in dark, vulnerable waters. And so this is in the same way that these blue triangles represent things flowing easily and harmoniously, that line down the middle of David's chart, these are oppositions. As easy as the trines are, the oppositions are really, really challenging. And so this is a kind of axis in David's chart that is probably triggered a lot. Wanting security versus insecurity, vulnerability versus safety. And so that's something that if he were here and could give us any feedback on this is something that he would be dealing with a lot. And this would be a major growth area for him. Whereas showing up, on game day or race day and being all grr, having everybody see him do that, that's the easy part for him. A financial misfortune, say, losing money or something like that, might be a bigger challenge for him because of the placements we've just talked about. So again, with any reading, we want to start with the most important, most significant stuff first, and then get down to the nitty-gritty. So we did the greatest blessing in the chart. That's always going to be represented by Jupiter. And notice that this Jupiter's always great, and Jupiter in Pisces is always great. But sometimes when you look at the full story of these blessings, it can feel a little bit like, well, thanks for the blessings. And sometimes the greatest hardships, the Saturn stuff or the Mars stuff is when you decode everything, comes out to be more fun or more exciting than the stuff that's supposed to be a blessing. So, but this is just a way to organize the way that charts talk to us. So what I would say is the greatest hardship is a word I don't like. Greatest challenge, I guess, in any chart is represented by Saturn. And David's got Saturn over here in the 7th house. So where Saturn restricts, in the same way that Jupiter expands, Saturn restricts. So there's restriction. This is what this is already telling us. Restriction in romantic one-on-one relationships for David. Having Saturn in the 7th house, it affects your relationships, your intimate relationships. Classically, people with Saturn in the 7th house often take longer to find a mate because Saturn works very slowly. Saturn slows everything down. It's the slowest visible planet. Or they might be someone that has an older partner or a super responsible partner because of, again, that presence of Saturn. And so Saturn can represent, it definitely represents part of David, but can also represent his partner. So looking at this Saturn, so we know how would this manifest in David's life. So this may mean it's that relationships are a sticking point for him, or relationships are something that he's come to later in life and learned a lot about, has that kind of feeling to it. Notable is that Saturn is also in its rulership. So Jupiter is in Pisces, exactly where it likes to be, and Saturn for him is in Aquarius, exactly where it likes to be. And so this is a very strong Saturn that I've really been trying to tease apart in my videos. What makes, and in my writings, you can follow my writings at 418astrology.substack.com. It's a free Substack. I try to write every day. Sometimes it happens once a week, but it's always teaching about astrology and giving, when I can, daily horoscopes. So I invite you to check that out. Back to Saturn and strong planets. I've spent some time picking apart what we mean when we say strong planets, because it's great when Jupiter is strong. He's a benefic. And so people tend to like his effects. We like expansion. We don't enjoy restriction. Or another verb that I use for Saturn is perfecting. We don't like being perfected either, or restricted. And so they're unpleasant. So what does it mean when a malefic is strong? Does that mean bad things happen? Not necessarily. It means malefics are malefics, as in they're usually experienced as unpleasant. Although, I don't know, if you were born a conjoined twin, some separation might be a good thing, right? And it's so it all depends on where that force appears and how much control it's under and how effective it is. The conjoined twin example, forget I used it. I don't like that. But you get the idea. Sometimes separation is a good thing. So Saturn, this is a very strong Saturn. When a planet is strong, that means it's operating effectively. And so there's a real upside to this Saturn for David and his relationships, which is that he's going to be very careful about who he lets in. Because that Saturn is so strong at perfecting, restricting. And so he'd likely be very, very careful about who he lets get close to him. And when he does let someone in, that person is very carefully chosen. The other thing that's noteworthy about him and his relationships here, this little Saturn, is it's got the South Node very close to it. I didn't talk about the North Node being in the 1st house, but we can bring in the nodes of the moon right now. So this is the good node of the moon over here, sort of looks like a rainbow. And then this is the bad one. It looks like an upside down rainbow. These are the nodes of the moon. It's sort of like the doors that the sun and the moon go through in order to have an eclipse. And so this is where it comes through to start a new eclipse, is the North Node. And so this is a very positive point. This is if you saw David in this Mars rising, Mars in Leo, Leo rising, this is like a warrior full of glory showing off in the Colosseum kind of thing. And this North Node is just, an extra special laurel leaf he's wearing kind of thing that adds even more power and glory to that image that comes up first for David. But then he's got the tail end of it over here in relationships. And you can see how, and this would be true for anybody, you can see how being a special person over here, which is sort of what the North Node in the first house means. It means somebody who's special, who's connected to fate in some special way. And then there's this, one of the old meanings for this is the dragon's tail in the South Node. And this is the end, the more the old karma, the karma that people think of as bad. And so having the South Node in the 7th house, it can say something about past lives, wherever your South Node is. So there may have been difficulty with relationships in past lives, but oftentimes where the South Node is can also talk about just like old energy. And so he's someone that might feel more comfortable with somebody from the same hometown, with somebody whose family knows his family, with somebody from the old college. There's an old energy with the relationships that comes along with that Saturn. And wherever the South Node is, sometimes I compare it to like, you can like pull all your junk out of the basement or whatever. And it can look especially bad to you because it's your junk. Like you can see your name on some of the stuff. That's kind of the meaning of the old karma that comes up with the South Node. And so it's likely that in his journey around relationships, he's encountered some of this old karma that may be family related, because that old karma can come down through family lines. It can be past lives. It can just be stuff he's encountered in this life. The birth chart is a document. It's funny because astrology is all about time, but everybody's birth chart is beyond time. And this chart will always be accurate for David, no matter what he does. This is where we get the idea that our lives are driven by fate or by the gods. Here are the gods in the form of the planets, and this is the fate that's spelled out for you. That's kind of the idea behind astrology. So that goes over the main points in David's chart. I would also, if I were doing a full reading here, talk about Mars and Venus, because they're the lesser malefic Mars and the lesser benefic Venus. We've already gone over Mars, and so we probably wouldn't have to say much more about that. But I think his Venus is worth talking about. Oh, before we do that, sometimes I notice things when I've gone on to the next thing. This Saturn, I ultimately think this Saturn is a blessing for David because it's in rulership and it's so strong and effective that I think even though he may be slower to find a relationship or have some difficulties or restrictions around finding the right relationship, this Saturn is working effectively for him. And because it's a strong Saturn, and that's a very good thing. A downside is it's not helped by any other part of the chart. There's some very, very faded lines here that connect it to other planets, but nothing significant. It's not hooked up to one of these grand trines that he has. It's not even hooked up to an opposition. It's just kind of sitting here, struggling or not struggling on its own. And so that adds a quality to David's life around relationships as well. It's not helped by any of this stuff, which is so interesting. There's all this fire stuff that we talked about earlier in the video is great and really attractive. This is the kind of thing that people would flock towards as a partner. But from David's point of view, it doesn't help him in the relationship game. Maybe he's a golden god out in the Colosseum slaying giraffes and lions, but that doesn't help him from his point of view in the romance department, in the intimacy department. So that's just something worth noting. So we've already talked about the Mars. touching on the Venus. So this Venus is the second best place in anybody's chart. And his Venus is right down here in the fourth house. So this would be what's attractive or attracting about him. The sweetest point in the chart, perhaps, is where Venus is. Now, just as his Jupiter is very happy because it's in rulership, his Saturn's very happy because it's in rulership, his Venus, not so much. She's in what's called her fall. Venus does not like being in Scorpio because, well, for many reasons, but one of the reasons being it's a sign that's ruled by Mars. And nobody appreciates that. Well, Venus doesn't anyway. Venus in Scorpio is very, very weakened. And so, but she's emotional because this is Scorpio. And this Venus coming up in the fourth house, this is something related to his childhood and upbringing. You know, when I talked about his relationship being perhaps something that has old karma associated with it. So somebody he knew growing up or somebody his family knew, it's got some old energy associated with it. Venus for a man that's heterosexual, which is making assumptions, but I don't know anything about David other than his name and his birth sign. Venus usually represents the partner, right? If you were gay, you'd have to alter this a little bit. But assuming he's, you know, here looking for a female partner, wherever Venus is for a heterosexual man in the chart represents like, here's your wife, here's your main relationship. And here's how she's represented. So she's in the fourth house. So that connects the relationship again to the family in a way that I think is interesting. So his wife or partner might remind him of the family, might be connected to the family, but Leo risings, they have this Scorpio in the fourth house. They often experience their home life as not that positive. But perhaps this Venus, this partnership is something that comes out of the home life. The Venus is associated with Neptune. It's in a pretty tight conjunction with Neptune. And so what Neptune does is alters consciousness. Venus attracts. Neptune alters consciousness. You put those two pieces together and you get a beautiful, gorgeous, mesmerizing hallucination full of, because this is for Scorpio, dark feelings. And so, and this is the second best thing in David's chart. It isn't really, but this is how we look at it in terms of the way that I teach people to read charts. So this Venus talks a lot about what his love relationship might be. If he were female and we were going all along heteronormative lines, Mars would represent, you know, the boyfriend or the husband. But you can change these things also if you're doing a chart reading in person and you're saying, this is a Mars person, but they're looking for a Mars person. The chart unfolds the way it's supposed to for us, which is one of the gifts. So there is something, both his female partners, if that's what he's in the mood for, his female partners are a major source of sweetness for him, and they're related somehow to that family, that upbringing, that lineage, that history. And so that's where I'd usually stop, because we've done the sun, the moon, the ascendant leader, or the ascendant ruler, excuse me, and we did Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus. That really kind of closes out anybody's chart. Anything else that we'd be looking at, like we've written our essay now down to the least important things. And so I would try to sum things up at this point by saying, what are the important highlights of this chart? So we have David, who comes up as a very fiery, motivated, energetic person who loves the spotlight. He's most comfortable in it. He relishes it. He's here to create his own creative fireworks. They're about him. But he also has this deep emotional feeling that is continually challenged when he feels insecure. And relationships have come with more difficulty or more slowness for David than for other people, or other people that he knows, or at least that's his perception. And he has some kind of mesmerizing, hallucinatory, uh, ethereal, otherworldly Venus figure in his life that's connected to his home. So that's the conclusion of the essay, so to speak. You can tell I was an English major. And that sums up David's chart. David, if you have a chance to watch this, I'd be very interested in your feedback because, as I said, I don't know anything about you except your comment. But I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you very much.